Welcome back. Today we're talking about the social contract theory account of ethics. So we have considered and motivations for and some of the problems with the claim that God is the source of morality. Uh, the nice thing about that view was that it made morality objective, right? We could point to the source of it and um, to the thing in the world, right, that makes our moral claims true or false. When we say murder is wrong, right, um, we don't have to worry about where it's the wrongness. The wrongness exists because God said it's wrong, right? But we saw there's some problems with the divine command theory version of that. We looked at the natural law theory, right? That considered, well, maybe there's sort of a rational order to the universe where everything has a purpose, and so immorality is just acting contrary to your purpose. That would also be objective if it were. But those theories have problems. So what we have in social contract theory is another um, attempt at making morality objective uh, in a way that doesn't depend on the existence of God or even on any particular rational order to the universe. So, social contract theory starts with some very minimal assumptions, right? It says, look, humans exist, right? That's objectively true. Um, and let's assume a bare minimum about what humans are like. Let's say that they're self-interested, right? Um, and that they're rational, right? They care about, right, what's best for them and getting what's best for them, and they have minds that can help them reason and learn how to do that. That seems reasonably accurate, right? There might be more to humans than that, but at the very least, yeah, we do want, to pursue our own interests, and we are able to reason surprisingly well, really. We don't think about it that much, but very few of you sort of like get into car accidents on the way to work or school. You don't step off cliffs. We all sort of have rational faculties that allow us to stay safe and even get some of the things we want in a very complicated society, right? Where getting a job and getting money is requires a lot of rationality, really. So certainly we've got, as opposed to the question of like, does God exist and what does God command? Here we're just assuming humans exist, they're rational, they're self-interested. So Hobbes is imagining, he does sort of a history, and it's a plausible history, but of course he's not a historian or an archaeologist or anthropologist or anything like that. So he's just saying, here's a plausible story about what human life was like before we had a moral code, right? He says, so, imagine cavemen, cavewomen, something like that, right? Just primeval world where, again, we've just got these humans. They just want to eat and satisfy their needs, self-interest, and they're rational enough, right? So he calls this the state of nature. He thinks before, right, we get any moral codes, right, when we just sort of have these humans out there trying to get whatever they can get, but no rules for morality yet. He thinks that this state of nature would be really horrible. And here's a famous quote from him. Hobbes says, there would be no place for industry because the fruit thereof is certain, right? Meaning, what's the point in working hard and building, right, something, building a house if somebody can just come along and kill you and take it. Consequently, no culture of the earth, right? Again, you're not going to work to uh, like make a clear a field, right, and plant it if just as soon as your crops come, somebody's going to come and steal them, right? Nor use of the commodities that could be imported by sea, right? There's not going to be people building boats and bringing and trade and all this stuff. No commodious building, again, no like houses, things like that. No instruments of moving, right? Carts, wheels, and removing, such as things that require much force. No knowledge of the face of the earth. You're not going to have time to do like geography and things like that. No account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death. The life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So the idea is in the state of nature, right? When you just have these humans that are just out for themselves, brutal existence. Right? You can't get much done. Go out there, try to gather enough food to eat that day, and try to find a place to sleep where somebody isn't going to sneak up behind you while you're sleeping, club you over the head. right? It's a very full and basic form of life, right? And presumably, at some stage of development, humans did live something like that. So again, Hobbes is not, a historian or anthropologist, but he does have some reasoning for why he thinks that um, early human life in the state of nature was so terrible. And here are his four basic assumptions. First of all, what he calls equality of need, meaning that we're all looking for the same stuff, right? Um, we all eat, right, the same plants. We all eat the same sorts of meat and things like that. It's not that like some of us eat wood, right, and some of us eat, tomatoes. Like we're all looking for the same stuff, so we're all competing for the same stuff. Now, it's not just that we need the same things, but there's not enough to go around. Scarcity of resources, that's number two. So um, we're all looking for the same stuff, and there's not enough to go around, right? Now, those two together seem like a recipe for trouble, right? For people fighting over the things they need to survive. Um, but there are two more conditions that guarantee this war of all against all. So third is the essential equality of human power. So the idea here is like humans are roughly the same size and strength, right? Of course, like some humans are stronger than others, but not so strong that you couldn't team up with like two or three other people and bring them down. So the idea is there no sort of natural hierarchy emerges as you might see like among species, right? So you never get a situation where um, you'll have the predators and the prey, right? Like um, rats are never going to be able to compete with coyotes, right? So coyotes will always hunt rats. Well, with humans, it's constantly changing, and no hierarchies will constantly be overturned. Just as somebody thinks that they're in power, a few humans will gang up and take them down, right? So you have constant struggle among the humans. And number four, limited altruism. Like none of this would be a problem if people were just nicer to each other, right? If we just said, oh, yeah, let's share. You have some of mine, no problem, right? I care just as much about you as I care about myself. No, that's just not how humans are, right? When it comes down to it, so Hobbes claims everyone's basically out for themselves. He's not denying that there is altruism, but there's a limit, right? So you add all these four things together, and Hobbes thinks you get the state of nature, brutal, nasty, right, and short. So, um, and again, this is what we call a priori reasoning. He's not doing research, right, into again of archaeology or anything, but he's saying just look at how humans are. All this seems true, and it seems like obvious that this would create an ugly state of nature. And we do have some evidence if you look at through history times when governments collapse, after a big war or something, you have sort of chaos for a little bit. Things get very ugly very quickly, right? And there is lots of murder and rape and other kinds of violence that goes on. So, a plausible scenario here that Hobbes is painting for us, primitive human society. So, how do we come out of the state of nature? Well, Hobbes says the only way is for humans to come to some agreement. Unfortunately, we're not only interested beings, we are rational beings, right? And as rational beings, we can figure out a way out of the state of nature. So, if everybody wants more stability, more predictability, the idea is that we'll be able to sacrifice certain freedoms in order to gain those benefits, right, of stability and predictability. For example, I'll agree not to steal from you, right? Even though that might be to my advantage sometimes, right? Maybe I might think, oh, left his backpack, I can snatch his laptop, right? That would be to my advantage. Um, but the thing is, I don't want to have to always be worrying about my laptop, right? And in fact, it prevents me from, going out there and whatever, farming or doing something productive if I'm spending all my time trying to guard my possessions. So wouldn't it kind of be to both our interest if we just said, look, nobody steals from anybody, right? Nobody has to worry about it, and we can all go out and do our thing, right, without having to worry about guarding our possessions. Um, that seems like a better deal for both of us. And if we're rational enough human beings to create such an agreement and abide by it, then we're both better off, right? Um, And in fact, right, we can create another agreement not to murder each other, right? We can create all kinds of agreements uh, so that we don't have to worry about getting stolen from and murdered. And we can all relax a little bit, we don't have to sleep with one eye open. And we might even be so relaxed that altruism might start to emerge, right? We might actually be willing to help somebody out who's having a problem, right? So this is the basic idea of social contract theory, and here I've got it summarized. Morality consists in the set of rules governing behavior that rational people will accept on the condition that others accept them as well. Right? Now, of course, if I agree not to steal from you and then you don't, right, you don't keep up your end of the bargain, well, then that's a disaster for me, right? But if everyone can agree and everyone accepts all the rules, everyone's going to be better off. And for Hobbes, this is lost in the mists of history, but this is the basis of morality. This is what we're doing, right? When our when you're a little kid and your mom says, "Now you shouldn't steal from other people," what she's doing is she is recalling what has been passed down through history as the basic social contract, right? That we humans agreed to thousands of years ago, that sort of got us out of the state of nature. So that's Hobbes' argument for it, and I've also assigned you, Hobbes' actual writing, and I think later this week I'll post a lecture on Hobbes and maybe Rand together, uh, the actual source material, because it's presented slightly differently than Rachel's does. But Rachel's does a helpful thing, whereas in addition to presenting Hobbes' argument, he presents sort of contemporary, kind of game theoretic uh, that gives us the same answer. It's a similar argument to what Hobbes does, but in a more contemporary um, presentation, right? So this is called the prisoner's dilemma. I don't know if any of you have heard of it before, but here's the basic scenario. So imagine you're living in some totalitarian country, Nazi Germany or something like that, and the police have arrested you, and they're accusing you of plotting against the government with another person named Smith. So it's you and Smith are in jail, and you're telling them, I'm innocent. I don't even know a Smith. I haven't been plotting against the government, I swear. Uh, but the police, right, in this system, they don't care. They just want to convict somebody. Uh, they couldn't care less about who's actually guilty. So they offer you this deal. And here's the deal. So if Smith doesn't confess, but you confess, right, and testify against Smith, then they'll release you. You'll go free, and Smith will be put away for 10 years. Right? Smith gets the same deal. So if he confesses, but you don't, right? If you insist on your innocence, but then Smith says, "Oh yeah, he was plotting against the government," yeah, then you get 10 years in jail, and Smith goes free, right? Now, or you might both confess, right? If you both confess to say, "Okay, yeah, we're plotting against the government, you caught us," right? Then you'll each only get a 5-year sentence. And if neither of you confesses, right? If you both hang tough, there won't be enough evidence for either of you, and they'll hold you for a year. That's the maximum they're going to hold you, and then they'll have to let both of you go. Right? Finally, they tell you, okay, look, these are basically the 4 options of how this could play out, right? And Smith is being offered the same deal, right? But you can't talk to him, and you have no way of knowing what Smith will do. So, what should you do in this situation? Well, there is in fact a rigorous sort of game theoretic answer to this problem. Again, assuming you're self-interested, right? You don't know Smith, you don't particularly care about Smith and what happens to him. What's your ideal strategy? Now, you might at first think, well, how could I ever decide unless I know what Smith is going to do, right? If I knew what Smith was going to do, then I could pick the best option. Um, but actually, it turns out that even without having any idea what Smith does, there is a solution. So this is how it goes, right? Look, either Smith is going to confess or he isn't, right? And we can run down the options either way. So let's suppose Smith does confess. Well, then you've got 2 options. You can confess, in which case you get 5 years, or you can hang tough, right? And in that case, you'll get 10 years. So if Smith confesses, you're better off confessing too, right? Well, what happens if Smith doesn't confess? Well, if Smith doesn't confess and you do, you go free, right? That was the rule. And if Smith confesses and you don't, if Smith doesn't confess and you hang tough too, you only get 1 year, right? So it seems like no matter what Smith does, you're better off confessing, right? If Smith confesses and you do, you get 5 years. If Smith confesses, if Smith doesn't confess and you do, you get off free, right? So game theoretically, the answer is obvious, right? Confess. Either way, you get the best option. The problem, right, is that this is all still sort of not an optimal solution, right? Because you end up, right? Remember your options were, right? The possible outcomes were get 10 years, get 5 years, get 1 year, or go free, right? If Smith is rational like you are, he's going to figure out, right? He's going to run the options and figure out, oh, yeah, no matter what uh, you do, Smith says, I'm going to confess, right? So what's going to happen? You're both going to confess and you're both going to get 5 years. Well, that's like the second worst option, right? Like, couldn't you figure something out where you got maybe only 1 year, right? Um, and it seems like if you could only communicate with Smith, right, and both make a deal and make a deal that you knew you would both stick to, right? You could both say, look, neither of us is going to confess, and you both just get 1 year, and that's the second best option, right? So the idea is when there's no deal between anybody and all bets are off, right, and you're just looking out for yourself, you end up with like the third best option, right? Second to last. But if you can get together and make a contract, you can both bump up, right, to a better deal. And this is the same idea as the social contract, right? So let's run the prisoner's dilemma again, but as just morality. How should I act, right, benevolently in society, right? So it seems like you've got the same four possibilities. You could run around acting selfishly while others act benevolently. That would kind of be the best case, right? You could go steal all you wanted and you wouldn't have to worry about anybody stealing from you, right? If all, again, if you're just self-interested and rational, that would be great, right? I'll just run around and do whatever the heck I want. Second choice, you'll act benevolently and other people act selfishly. Well, that would be terrible, right? That would be like the worst case because now everybody's stealing from you, but you're not stealing from anybody else, right? Other options, everybody acts selfishly. So you steal, they steal. So you get a little bit when you can steal, but then you have to worry about everyone stealing from you. That's kind of like number two. And so that's like number three, like the third worst. And then D, everyone acts benevolently. So I don't get to steal. That's too bad. I could have used a computer if I had taken yours, but I also don't have to worry about you taking mine. So everyone acting benevolently is sort of the second best option, right? So again, structurally, right, the prisoner's dilemma and the morality and the social contract, it's all basically the same problem, which says if everyone's out for themselves, we all end up with the number three option, like the third worst. But if we can all agree, make some agreement, we can end up with the second best option, right? And we have to assume that other people are making the same calculation. They're all rational, right? So we're never going to get the first option. I get to steal from whoever I want, and everyone else decides to be, right, good little boys and girls. That's just not going to happen, right? So really, the best we can hope for is the second one where we make a contract, nobody steals, nobody kills, right? So the idea is, um, all morality is self-interest plus rationality, right? And you figure out, okay, in a society, like the best outcome for me is going to be that nobody lies, right? And nobody murders and things like that. So morality is just self-interest, right? Rational beings figured out the best case scenario for themselves, which happened to be the best case scenario for everyone. There's other advantages, right, that come with accepting or believing social contract theory as the basis of morality, right? So if we accept this theory that moral rules are just the rules that rational people would accept, so long as everyone accepts them, it solves a few puzzles about morality. Um, First of all, you might wonder, why do we have these particular rules? Like, what are the moral rules, first of all, right? Like, how do I know what are the things I should be doing and shouldn't be doing, and why? Like, why those particular rules? Well, now we have a kind of a procedure for figuring out, right? What are the moral rules, right? Um, ideally, you could just survey everyone in the world and say, hey, would you agree to this rule if everyone, abided by it? And it might turn out that everyone would agree, yeah, stealing is wrong, but maybe not everyone would agree that you shouldn't be allowed to, I don't know, right, grow tomatoes or something like that, right? Think of it, some random rule, right? The ones that everyone agrees to, everyone says, yeah, that I would take that rule. That's going to be the ones that turn out to be the moral rules, right? And we can't survey everybody, but you can still kind of reason through it. You can think, well, yeah, why would anybody care about whether anybody grows tomatoes? I don't see that being a rule that anybody would be interested in. But the stealing one, that would make sense that everyone would want to agree to that because, yeah, nobody wants to be stolen from, and like it would make things so much easier. Right? Um, or another example, right? Homosexuality, right? Um, is that a moral rule, right? Is there a moral rule against homosexuality? Well, let's ask. Let's think. Would everyone agree not to be homosexual if, is that something that everyone would want to agree to? And it doesn't seem like one of the things that would turn out that anybody was particularly interested in making that. At least if you ask me, well, I don't know. I'm not homosexual, but I might, who knows, I might want to be. Like, I could leave that option open because doesn't it's no skin off my back if other people are homosexual, right? It doesn't bother me at all. So just as soon let them do it, and if I want to do it, then I'm free to do it too, right? So it doesn't seem like that's the sort of thing that would turn out to be a moral rule because I just don't get any benefit forbidding people from. It's just not in my self-interest in any way. So if you think that homosexuality is not morally wrong, then social contract theory, right, seems to give you that answer. Now, on the other hand, if you think homosexuality is wrong, then contract theory is not going to be as attractive. Um, so, number two, another advantage of social contract theory. What is the connection between morality and rationality? Um, we've been saying throughout this class, right, that again, if I make a moral judgment and I say, hey, you shouldn't have an abortion, or hey, it's okay to have an abortion, you should be free to ask me, say, well, why do you say that? What are your reasons for your moral judgment? I'm supposed to be able to give you reasons. Well, social contract theory makes this connection between morality and rationality, right? Moral rules are the ones that rational people would agree to if everyone, right, if it was enforceable. So that's nice that that connection is there. Another attractive thing about social contract theory, it tells us when we're allowed to break the rules, right? So it seems like sometimes moral rules should be broken, right? They're not sort of exceptionless. For example, you know, yeah, you shouldn't kill people, maybe except in self-defense, etc., right? And social contract theory says, well, look, one time, one situation where you can break the rules is if someone else breaks the rules, right? So if someone steals, well, we can now steal that thing back from them and even give them a fine or something, right? And our legal system can be interpreted as um, right ways when breaking the rules is sanctioned in order to, you know, get order to get back at someone who's broken the rules, right? So if someone kills, right, okay, now we can, in places where there is the death penalty, now we can kill them, right? We can break the rule of not killing. That person is outside the social contract. They've broken, right, the covenant, and so now we can treat them differently. So it sort of makes sense of why our legal system works. Um, and number four, sort of how much can morality demand from us? So we haven't talked about utilitarianism yet, but very briefly, we're going to come up on a moral theory that says, look, the right thing to do is just what causes the most pleasure for everybody, right? We need to think about everybody equally. And we'll find that the net result of that is that since you're only one person, right, your interests and your needs are not going to count very much, right? And it's going to end up being like, oh, I just have to give up everything to help people that are poorer than me and stuff like that. And that seems like kind of sounds good, right? I get that that would be a good thing, but also like, come on, can I live my life and just sort of like, can I pursue my interests? Do I have to think about the whole world all the time and give up everything that like would interest me or comfort me, right? Um, we tend to want a moral theory gives us a little leeway, right, to sort of like that's not too demanding of us. And it seems like social contract theory is not hopefully too demanding, right? Now, at first, you might worry because you might think, well, since social contract theory is like, right, talking about what's best for society, wouldn't we always be required to sacrifice ourselves for the greater good of society, right? But you have to remember the social contract theory requires that rules that everyone would follow, right? And nobody's going to sign up for a social contract that says you're not able to keep anything that you earn and you have to give it all to the poor. Like nobody's going to sign up to that. If you want morality to be sort of like, I don't know, match your intuitions of how much it can demand from you, well, social contract theory is just going to be a bunch of people just like you, right, who are also kind of thinking, look, yeah, I'll sign up for this as long as it's like not too demanding, right? So morality is not going to end up too exceptionally demanding. So that's social contract theory and some of the benefits of it, right? It gives us objective morality that doesn't have to be based in a belief in God. Um, and, it's instead based in a plausible sort of story about human history that's, doesn't assume too much about humans except that we're rational and self-interested. And it seems to produce sort of the right rules, right? The ones that we seem to really care about. Um, and all the other things I mentioned. But of course, there's going to be problems with it. There's problems with all of these theories, right? Which is why it's still philosophy and hasn't spun off into the science of ethics, right? We've still got deep, very puzzling problems. So, one problem with social contract theory is it seems to make legality and morality synonymous, right? Because again, um, morality is just the rules that rational humans agree on. Well, that's also what laws are, right? At least in democratic countries, right? They're the rules that we all agree on to run the country. So, um, if anything that humans agree on, like any rule that humans agree on, is a moral rule, and laws are rules that humans agree on, then laws are also moral rules, right? Which would mean breaking the law is always immoral. But the problem with that is sometimes we think that our laws are actually immoral, right? And some of our greatest examples of morality are people and groups of people who have engaged in civil disobedience, right? So uh, Gandhi, right? So the British had these rules about these laws about salt, right? That basically meant that like people couldn't just collect their own salt from the sea, poor people, which they've been doing forever. And so Gandhi organized a march to the sea where people went and deliberately broke the law to collect salt. In our country, Martin Luther King Jr., right? So there were these Jim Crow laws in the South, which meant that there was segregation between black people and white people. And so Martin Luther King and a bunch of other people went to the South and deliberately broke these laws, right, to bring attention to them and try to change them because they thought the laws were immoral, right? The segregation was immoral. Um, at the time, right, many people were opposed to what Martin Luther King Jr. was doing um, because they thought that it undermined the social contract, right? But King was arguing that, look, in this case, the laws are just immoral, right? So um, you might worry, okay, if social contract theory means that, Martin Luther King is an immoral guy, right? Or that protesting slavery or segregation would be immoral, that's definitely a big problem for social contract theory, right? But the social contract theorist might have a way to get around that problem. So again, the entire point of the social contract is to guarantee certain basic rights and liberties, right? You want to be able to leave the house and go eat lunch without worrying about getting beaten or robbed or murdered, right? And if the social contract isn't protecting those rights for you, then should you still abide by it, right? Are you still required to commit to it, right? So think about the situation of black people in the South at that time of segregation. They couldn't just go out anywhere they wanted and have lunch, right? They might get beaten up if they went, right, and sat in the whites only section of the diner or whatever, right? So the social contract wasn't protecting them, right? And so the social contract, right, they were not arguably required to abide by the social contract, right? If it's not doing its job, then why would you ever abide by it, right? So again, these rules, these Jim Crow laws, were not the sorts of rules that black people would agree to if they were given the opportunity, right, to deliberate and create a social contract. So maybe you can be a social contract theorist and still believe that slavery and segregation and those things are wrong, right? So again, we have a little dialectic here, right, where we had social contract theory, the motivations for it, we had a possible objection and then a possible response, right, from the social contract theorist. But there are other objections too, right? And again, if you like social contract theory and you want to write a paper defending it, then great, you can certainly do that. So um, another objection we need to consider is like, remember, this is all sort of hypothetical. There's no social contract. Nobody has found right the contract that the cavemen wrote. Um, one quote is like, "Yeah, social contract theory isn't worth the paper it's not written on, right? Because it was just never written down. It's not a real thing. It's a hypothetical thing." Is this a big problem for social contract theory? Well, not necessarily, right? The social contract theorist might respond, look, this is like a procedure or a guide. It's hypothetical, but it helps us figure out what are the moral rules, right? It's just like a procedure for figuring out what the rules are, which ones are moral, right? So like, don't steal does seem to end up being a moral rule because if you ask people, they all say, yeah, that I would take that deal. I won't steal. You don't steal. Seems fair. But things like homosexuality don't necessarily end up being immoral because at least if you ask me, I'd be like, I it doesn't bother me if other people want to be homosexual, right? It's not harming me or it's not against my interest. And then, I have the freedom to be homosexual if I feel like it, right? So, no, that one seems like well, let's leave that open. Um, so if we just think of it as a hypothetical procedure, that's enough, right? There doesn't have to be an actual social contract that the king would sign. But here's another. So I think this is maybe the most serious problem for social contract theory is that there are lots of beings that can't um, enter into a social contract, right? And if they can't enter into a social contract, then according to social contract theory, we have no obligations toward them, right? Again, I'm only obligated not to steal from the other people that sort of quote signed the contract, right, entered the agreement. But the problem is there's like, non-human animals. Some of us think have a moral status. Human babies, definitely, like most of us say, you can't go around hurting babies, right? Even though you can't enter into a contract with a baby. There's also like future generations. If you think we have any moral obligation to, for example, not ruin the climate for the next generation, or potentially oppressed populations that, for whatever reason, can't enter into the social contract. Um, so, social contract theory doesn't seem to forbid me from, like, for example, torturing cats for fun, right? Cats can't enter into a social contract, so we're not bound by any obligation to them, and apparently, according to social contract theory, can do whatever the heck I want to a cat. And if you think that's wrong, or you think that's immoral, then that's kind of a big problem, right? Um, Again, it seems like I could do whatever I want to a baby, right? Now, maybe I can't do whatever I want to your baby, right? Because maybe it's like your property or something. But certainly, we would want to say it's immoral for me to have a child and cause harm to that child, right? But it's not clear how social contract theory could make that wrong. Now, again, maybe you can write a paper saving social contract theory against this objection, right? There's probably ways, right, to um, patch it up or say no, it's social contract theory can work for all those cases. So I think social contract theory is interesting, and I think there's a lot of open space here for people to pursue interesting objections. I'm curious to see what you have to say in your discussion posts if any of you want to develop this into. All right, well that's it for now, and next lecture will be about I think I'll do a joint sort of Hobbes Rand lecture on the actual original text.